Good day, this is Jim Pytel from Columbia Gorge Community College. This is Digital Electronics. This lecture is entitled Asynchronous Counters. Okay, besides me telling you that this lecture is about asynchronous counters and the fact that I've written the word asynchronous counters above a device, what else about this device might lead you to believe that it is an asynchronous counter? Okay, so an asynchronous counter has a single clock input to a single flip-flop. Other flip-flops inputs to their clock are from the previous stage's output. That's a major identifying characteristic of an asynchronous counter. They are not clocked together. They have different clock frequencies and potentially because of propagation delay may be occurring at different times. Additionally, notice that each stage's J and K inputs are constantly in toggle mode. What we're going to do is a pretty hefty analysis of an asynchronous counter. And we're going to take into account propagation delay to go ahead and illustrate the fact that there are glitches that occur in asynchronous counters. And if you're running these things fast enough, those glitches might become problematic for you. This is by no means the only way to build an asynchronous counter. We're going to talk about some other different examples right now. But let's just do a timing diagram analysis of this 2-bit asynchronous counter. Why is it 2 bits? Well, because there are 2 flip-flops. Start off with the one truth that you should understand before even beginning this. What does a counter do? It counts. Okay, if there are 2-bit positions, what do you think it's going to count to? We don't know what direction we're counting, but chances are it could take the value 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, and 1, 1. These being our outputs, MSB Q1 and LSB Q0. We don't know which direction, whether it's going to go up or down, but I want to bet that most likely this 2-bit counter is going to exhaust those 4 combinations. So let's go ahead and just do a timing analysis. And before you do this is you have to know how a JK flip-flop works. If you don't know how a JK flip-flop works, go back, hit the JK flip-flops lectures. And in reality, you can just fast forward them to toggle mode because what happens? We're always in toggle mode. If you're in toggle mode, what happens? Whatever value Q was, once it goes into toggle mode on that positive edge, in this particular case, these are positive edge JK flip-flops, what happens? It switches to its opposite state. So if it was a 0, becomes a 1. If it was a 1, toggles to become a 0. Okay, so you have to understand toggle mode. And just go ahead and do a timing analysis of this. Here I've written a timing diagram analysis here. I've got my clock. These are positive edge JK flip-flops. So from the perspective of the least significant bit, i.e. the low order, i.e. the left JK flip-flop, what does Q0 look like? And because we're going to be using not Q0 a little bit later, what does not Q0 look like? Obviously, not Q0 is the opposite of Q0. So just go ahead and, given that clock input, just do Q0 and not Q0. And one might be led to believe that on every single positive edge of that clock, Q0 at those specific moments switches values, it toggles, it takes its opposite state. And in a perfect world, you'd be absolutely correct. The problem is there is an inherent propagation delay that occurs when a positive edge is received by the particular JK flip-flop. Let's pretend Q0 was a 0, and it's going to stay a 0 until it gets that positive edge. In a perfect world, it would transition right there. It's not a perfect world. What happens is Q0 is a 0, and there's a finite amount of time. I'm just going to draw it as a little indent at which it actually makes that transition. And every single time that toggle occurs, there is that same delay. What you would get for the output of Q0 would be something like this. Okay, so far so good. And notice again, every single time we've accounted for that small but potentially observable delay that occurs. What does not Q0 look like? It looks the exact opposite of Q0. You can go ahead and neglect the propagation delay because Q0 and not Q0, let's assume they're occurring at the same time. So not Q0 is going to look like this. So there is not Q0, which is the perfect complement of Q0. Now, let's look at from the perspective of the MSB or the high order or the right flip-flop. What is its clock signal? Well, its clock signal is not Q0. Notice it's a positive edge trigger JK flip-flop, and it's always in toggle mode. So anytime not Q0 has a positive edge, it will toggle, it'll flip to its opposite state. And in a perfect world, one would assume that it would toggle right there and right there and right there. Precisely. However, there exists a certain measurable propagation delay. In this particular case, let's go ahead and pretend there's a certain measurable amount of time that it's delayed at that point. Let's say Q1 was a 0, and it's going to stay a 0 until it receives that positive edge plus the propagation delay and toggle. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what Q1 looks like with those propagation delays taken into account. Okay, and there's Q1. And right here, just look exactly when the whole device is triggered on that positive clock edge. Compare it to when Q0 reacts, and then compare when Q1 reacts. Our positive edge occurs right there, right there. This is where it's the most telling. Look what happens. I've got this first delay right there. This second delay occurs right there. It's basically 2 delays. It's a ripple there. As we add more and more stages to this, it's not going to be 1 propagation delay behind, 2 propagation delays behind for the second one. Once you get to a third bit, it's going to be 3 propagation delays behind. And again, notice here, a single propagation delay occurs here, and a second one occurs right there. If we were to do 3 stages, we'd have 3 propagation delays, and we could potentially have some problems here. And we'll talk about those glitch states generated when we actually compare the output. What's going on here? It's a 2-bit counter. Is it counting up or down? Well, the answer is where are our inputs? Where are our outputs? So the outputs as defined in the diagram above are Q1 and Q0. So what is the state of Q1 and Q0? And I'm going to go ahead and clean up the diagram. So what are the states of Q0 and Q1 during those block intervals right there? Well, Q1 is 0, Q0 is a 0, so the state it's in is 0, 0. Next positive edge comes along on that clock. What happens? Well, after a certain propagation delay, Q0 becomes a 1. We are in a state of 0, 1. Okay, we've counted up 0, 0, 2, 0, 1. This state, and I'm only looking at Q1 and Q0. I'm not looking at Q0. As a matter of fact, we can go ahead and get rid of Q0 because we no longer need that. Okay, the only time we were using not Q0 was to generate that positive edge. Look at this. What's occurring there? It's a glitch. We'll come back to the glitch in a second. The next state, Q1 is a 1, Q0 is a 0. We've counted to 2. What's happening now? We're counting up, 1, 1, counting to 3. What happens here? You guessed it, a glitch. We'll come back to it. Finally, what happens here? We have recycled and we are back to 0, 0, and the whole thing begins again. What about those glitch states? In a perfect world, our up counter, because we're counting from 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, recycling at 0, 0, and beginning the thing again. One would think that we would count from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. But look what's happening here. We count from 0 to 1 to 0, 0, briefly, to 2, to 3, to 2, back to 0, 0. Those glitch states are brief, erroneous transitional states. And notice what's happening here. It's because the LSB is changing first. And this is precisely the reason why the gray code was invented. There exists this transition from 0, 1 has to transition both of them. 1, 0. It's transitioning both of them. And if the LSB changes first, you're going to get that erroneous 0, 0 state. And what gray code was invented to do is go ahead and prevent that simultaneous transition of 2 or more bits. Just a single bit changes at a time. Although brief, your counter in this particular case could erroneously read 0, 1, 0, 2, 3, 2, 0, and begin the whole thing again. So be aware that these glitch states do exist. And sometimes they're measurable and sometimes they're very undesirable, especially high-speed devices. How would I make a 3-bit asynchronous counter? The answer is just tack another JK flip-flop at the end. It's that simple. Okay, let's go ahead and do a timing analysis of a 3-bit asynchronous counter. Okay, so we went ahead and added a 3rd JK flip-flop also in toggle mode at the very end of this thing. That now becomes our MSB. And what is its clock input? It's not Q1. Go ahead and do a timing analysis of this from the perspective of Q0, not Q0, Q1, and not Q1, accounting for the propagation delay. And if you've done everything right, it should look exactly like we've done up in our previous example because we've changed absolutely nothing. Q0 will toggle on a positive edge of a clock with a propagation delay. Okay, so it's not simultaneous with that clock. There's a finite delay. So one would think it would toggle right here there, there, and so on, but it doesn't. There is a measurable delay. That delay is going to look like this. There you go. Notice, again, I've included that propagation delay in there. And by the way, too, Q0, Q1, and Q2 are all at a 0 state. They're all initially 0. So I've gone ahead and toggled it on those positive edges of the clock signal, accounting for propagation delay. Again, where are my positive edges? They're right here. Now let's go ahead and see what not Q0 looks like. What's the exact opposite of Q0? Okay, so there's what not Q0 would look like. And what is Q1 basing its clock input off of? It's basing its clock input off the positive edge of not Q0. Okay, so there are our new positive edges by which Q1 will toggle. And again, in a perfect world, one would assume right there, and there, and there they would toggle, but they don't because there's a finite propagation delay and it will toggle slightly after that. What will Q1 look like? It'll look like this. There you go. So that's the positive edge of not Q0 plus a measurable propagation delay at each positive edge. What does not Q1 look like? It looks like a perfect complement of Q1. And what is Q2 basing its toggle input off of? The positive edges of not Q1. And in a perfect world, one would assume they'd toggle at that precise moment right there, but they don't. There's a measurable delay and it's going to toggle. So Q2 is going to go along. It was a 0. Normally it would toggle there, but there's a propagation delay which occurs and it toggles right there. Same here at the very end. It toggles right there. What do we have here? It's a 3-bit counter. Where are our outputs? Q2, MSB, down to Q1, Q0. So let's go ahead and get rid of not Q1 and not Q0 because they're kind of messing up our analysis of this. What do the outputs look like? All those things we're doing is generating the positive edges for those things to toggle on. So let's go ahead and get rid of not Q1 and not Q0. So a very quick glance at what the output of this thing looks like. To me, it looks like it's an up counter. Notice I'm not going to do the glitches right now, but we are going from 0, 0, 0 to 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, triple 1. Finally, we're recycling back to 0, 0, 0. It's a 3-bit up counter. 0, 0 to 1, 1 recycles. Let's start looking at some of these glitch states, however. Remember, the LSB changes first. So if we were in 0, 0, 1 and we are trying to transition to state 2, 0, 1, 0, the LSB changes first. What happens here is we get this erroneous state, very briefly, of 0, 0, 0. Walk through this timing diagram and see if you can identify any of the other glitch states that might occur. So what about right here? Here's a particularly troublesome section. So we are in state 3, 0, 1, 1. And our next state, we want to go to 4, but our LSB changes first. That goes to a 0. That's still a 1. That's a 0. So we're going from 3 to 2. Doesn't make sense because we're trying to go up. But before we reach our ideal state of 4, what's happening here is, again, that LSB is changing first, i.e. Q1. The lower order is changing before that upper order. So that goes to 0. So we get this state where we're in state 3, 0, 1, 1. Then we go to state 2, 0, 1, 0. Then we go to state 0, 0, 0, 0, before we go to state 4, 1, 0, 0. They're extremely brief transitions, however. Okay, it's a glitch state. You don't necessarily want to be reading the inputs at those times of transition. Ideally, you should be going from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7, recycling back to 0 perfectly. Let's go ahead and see if you can identify any of the other glitch states within here, and it's going to look like this. Okay, so there are the other glitch states within our 3-bit up counter. We've got a period of transition from 5 to 6. We inadvertently stop at 4 briefly. And then finally, when we're going from 7, we want to recycle all the way to 0, 0. We're having these brief stops at states 6 and 4. In a perfect world, yeah, we're going to go from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right back to 0. But be aware, if you are potentially sampling information at the exact moment that that glitch occurs, you're going to get a brief erroneous state. How would I do this for a 4-bit up counter? Take that exact same configuration, cut and paste, put it on at the end. What's going to happen now? Think about this. We just added more propagation delay. We're going to add more glitch states, these transitions where 2 or more bits are trying to simultaneously change. We could potentially get caught in more glitch states. This, by the way, is not the only way to make an asynchronous counter. There are a number of other configurations. For example, try this one out for size. Okay, notice the only thing I changed is the clock input for the next stage is the previous stage's Q output, not the not Q, if that makes sense. You'll find some different behavior with this. It's a 3-bit counter. How many different positions do you think there's going to be? Well, 3 bits, 000, all the way up to 111, potentially, is 8 different particular counting positions it could be in. But you'll find something neat about this one here. Which direction does it go? And I'm going to throw you another curveball here. We're not starting in 000. We're not starting in a cleared state. Let's say we're starting in state 0, 1, 0. We're starting at state 2. Go ahead and look at it from the perspective of Q0, accounting for propagation delays. Just do Q0. What the output for Q0 should look like is this. Okay, so Q0 toggles, i.e. takes its opposite value at the positive edge plus a measurable propagation delay. What does Q1 do? Well, Q1 will toggle at the positive edge of Q0 plus a measurable propagation delay from there. But because I'm being tricky here, I've given you a starting state of Q1 being 1. So let's go ahead and start the analysis. I'm going to give you guys a hint here. It's starting at 1. Okay, it would ordinarily toggle there, but there is a measurable propagation delay and it toggles to 0. Okay, go ahead and see if you can do the analysis for Q1 from this point forward. Okay, so that's what Q1 looks like with the positive edge of Q0 being there, plus a measurable propagation delay. You're going to get it toggling at those positive edges plus the propagation delay. It should look something like this. Let's say Q2 now. From the perspective of Q2, what is its clock? Well, its clock is the positive edges of Q1. And ordinarily in a perfect world, they would toggle there, but because there's a measurable propagation delay, it will toggle ever so slightly later. So what does Q2's output look like given the fact it's starting at 0? It should look something like this. And there you go. That's what Q2 looks like. All right, do your analysis. What is the output Q2 down to Q1 look like? Well, obviously we started at state 0, 1, 0. I gave you that. Where does it progress to? Well, there's a glitch state in there. Yeah, don't worry about it right now. In the big picture, what's going on? 0, 0, 1. 000. What's it doing? It's going from 2 to 1 to 0. It's counting down. And then it's recycling up to 111. 110, 101, 100, 011. And where are we back to? 010. It's a down counter. Although we started at state 2, we're going from 2 to 1 to 0 to 7 to 6 to 5 to 4 to 3 to 2, and you guessed it, back to 1 to 0 to 7. Okay, so it's a down counter. It's still a 3-bit counter, except it's counting in a different direction. And the only thing I changed was this value right there. The clock input is now Q0 as opposed to not Q0. Let's go ahead and see if you can identify some of the potential glitch states that you might occur. And again, look for those times when 2 or more bit positions are trying to simultaneously change from 1 to 0. So I've identified a couple potential areas of problem. Again, we're going that 2-state. Ideally, a down counter, we should be going to 1. So 010 down to 001, but we've got a brief moment in time where we're erroneously in a 3-state, 011. Additionally, there is an error when we're going from 000. We're trying to recycle all the way back up to 7, because again, what does a 7 to 0 down counter do? It's going to go from 7 to 0, recycle all the way back to 7. And the problem is the LSB changes first, i.e. this guy changes first. So we get a state of 001. Then the next one changes 011. Then finally, this guy changes 111. So we get this brief moment in time when we go from 0, ideally to 7, but we're getting this brief moment of time when we get a 1, 3, then 7. Okay. Same thing occurs. The transition from 6 to 5, we're erroneously going into 7. And then a transition from 4 to 3, when inadvertently stopping at 5 and 7 midway before we do the transition to 3. There are other configurations we could do. Go ahead and try this one on your own. Okay, so here's an example. I've got Q0 being fed into the clock input of the middle stage and Q1 being fed into the clock input for the last stage. But notice each one of these JK flip-flops is now a negative edge detection device. What's going to happen? Well, they're toggling with respect to the negative edge of the clock with a measurable propagation delay. The middle stage, Q1, is going to be toggling the negative edge of Q0 with a measurable propagation delay from there. And Q2 will toggle with a measurable propagation delay with respect to the negative edge of Q1. Again, very simple, subtle changes. What does this thing do? Well, chances are it's going to do something with those 3 zeros to 3 ones. Which direction does it go? Figure it out. Use the timing diagram. Additionally, notice I've thrown you a little loophole here too. Q2, Q1, Q0. I'm starting them in a state of 4, 1, 0, 0. Okay, start off at 1, 0, 0 and figure out where it goes from there. Does it go to 5? Does it go to 3? Does it go to someplace else? Okay, figure out what your timing diagram would look like. Last thing before we close up our discussion for asynchronous counters. Okay, I have been using these things that count to a full sequence. 000 up to 111, quadruple 0 up to quadruple 1. Let's say if you want to not count that high. Okay, for example, maybe I wanted to count from 0 to 9, BCD, like everybody does. It's not like you're going to look at your clock and see hexadecimal numbers, A, B, C, D, E, and F. You want to limit your count sometimes. Okay, so that's known as truncating. Truncate means, cutting a tree, a trunk, you're cutting something off. How you do that is the use of these clear and preset inputs on the JK flip-flops, which I've not drawn in this particular example. What you basically do is allow this thing to go into the next highest state and clear it out instantly. Okay, so it'll briefly enter the next highest state and then clear out the whole thing simultaneously, and you're going to start back up at quadruple 0 or whatever you want to, and then begin the count sequence again. So let's go ahead and see how that's done. Okay, so to discuss truncated count sequences, we're going to use this asynchronous counter right here configured in the following fashion. What this really is, it's kind of the example problem I just left you with, and all I've done is tacked on a 4th JK flip-flop negative edge detection device to the very end of it. And notice what I've done is I've included that clear input, and I'm not clearing it. Okay, I'm not clearing it because all the clear, the active low clears, are being hooked to +5 in this particular case. What I've created is basically a full sequence 4-bit binary up counter. Don't believe me? Go ahead and do the timing analysis, and you'll notice too in my timing analysis here I have neglected to input those delays. What we're saying is we're assuming this, we are running this thing at slow enough that those glitch states, those potential glitch states between there are not of a concern, and for all intents and purposes we can conclude that this is a full 4-bit up counter. So, like I said, the clear inputs. We want to make use of those clear inputs to have a truncated count sequence. And let's say I want to count up from quadruple 0 to 9 and recycle. Find where 9 is on this diagram. And again, we are going from MSB Q3 to LSB Q0. Okay, we start out at quadruple 0. We count up to 1, count up to 2. I'm sparing you the gory details. We're here at 8, and now we arrive at 9. What we want to do is we want that sequence, and we want to go ahead and clear out right here and start at quadruple 0 again. And now the problem is how do I clear at that instantaneous moment? What I do is I actually kind of feed in the next count sequence. So the next natural count sequence is 1010, i.e. decimal 10 or hexadecimal A. What I do is I feed that input, and that input Q3 to Q0, what I want is when the clears recognize 1010, I want them to get an active low, because they're active low clears. And how I'm going to do that? With our buddy, the NAND gate. Okay, and that's why he's hanging out here up in the corner. So how do I get that NAND gate to produce a 0? Well, if you remember from the truth table for a NAND gate, the output of a NAND gate is low when all inputs are high. Okay, so I've got to make all inputs high. I can possibly put in Q3, Q2, Q1, and Q0. I want it to clear at 1010, MSB to LSB. All I do is I invert Q2, invert Q0. What does my NAND gate get when I've got 1010? It gets all ones on its inputs. What does that do? It produces a 0 at that moment and that moment only. It's a decoder. Okay, it's recognized the presence of a certain input, indicating its presence with appropriate output. Now what I do, get rid of that constant high on the clears and feed the output of that NAND gate to every single clear. And you may be worried, well, what about the other times that NAND gate produces 0? It will never produce 0 because this unique code 1010 is the only time that it will produce that active low. Our count sequence now looks like this. Okay, let's say we started at a clear position. We count from quadruple 0 to 1, 2, 3, finally up to 8, then up to 9. And what happens, what's our next natural count sequence? And this thing is fully enabled. What happens is we get this brief moment in time when the value for that counter is 1010. At that moment, it's instantly cleared out. And what happens? It starts at quadruple 0 again. And what do? Is we start that 0, 1, 2, all the way up to 9 again, briefly entering 1010, clears it out, starts the count sequence again. So that's truncation. There is obviously some drawbacks to this. We do have a glitch state right here. There are far more cunning means of doing this. So you could potentially avoid that glitch state. You could potentially preset it even if you wanted to use those active low presets, which I've not drawn on this circuit here, to potentially start a sequence at a specific number. You don't have to start at 0. You could start at 2. You could potentially use these clears and presets to your advantage. But all I want to do is just this brief introduction right now, and when we talk about some fixed function integrated circuits that are counters and how to specifically do those, I'll mention this again. But right now what we're doing is we're introducing an obviously erroneous state because we want for it to count from 0 to 9, but we're counting effectively up to 10 or hexadecimal A very briefly. But once it reaches that next highest state, forces a clear, it goes back to 0. One last thing before we complete this lecture on asynchronous counters. Look at the timing diagrams. Which is faster, the clock, the LSB, or the MSB? Look at every single one of these diagrams. As a matter of fact, I'll just go ahead and give you a full 4-bit binary counter so you can see what I'm asking here. So here's our diagram of a clock for a 4-bit up counter, and all I'm asking is which one is going faster? It's very quickly obvious. The clock is going faster. Okay, let's pretend it's nuking fast. Let's pretend the frequency is 50 megahertz. So what's the period of something with 50 megahertz? It's a period of 20 nanoseconds, meaning from there to there it takes 20 nanoseconds to go from 0 to 1 back to 0 again. Look at the period of Q0. It's 2 of those clock periods. So it's 40 nanoseconds. Look at the period of Q1. It's 80 nanoseconds. The period of Q2. Get the picture here? We're dividing it. It's frequency division. You go ahead and run the numbers. What's the frequency of Q0? It's half of what you started with. What's the frequency of Q1? It's half of Q0, which is a quarter of what you started with. If you started out with 50 megahertz. What is Q2? It's half of the one you started with, Q1, or an eighth of what you started with. Okay, 6.25 megahertz. And finally, what's the frequency for Q3? It's half of Q2, or in this particular case, it's a 16th of what you started with, 3.125 megahertz. And as you keep doing this, the clock would get slower, the resultant frequency would get lower and lower and lower. Say you want to run certain things at 50 megahertz, say you want to run certain things at 3.125 megahertz. So your ability to split this clock into potentially different frequencies, it's a frequency divider. Again, one of our major functions of sequential circuits we talked about is counters, frequency division, and registers, which are a form of storage. What is frequency division? It's basically a subset of the counters. And if you want a general formula for this, if I'm going to divide it once, it's 1 divided by 2 to the first. If I divide it twice, it's 1 divided by 2 to the second, i.e. 1/4. If I divide it 3 times, 1 divided by 2 to the third, 1/8, you get the picture. So progressively lowering and lowering that clock frequency to potentially use that clock for other devices that may need to run slow. This concludes the lecture on asynchronous counters, and obviously we've discovered there are some issues with an asynchronous counter, number one being the glitch states. So we're going to go ahead and try to resolve that use of synchronous counters, which in contrast to asynchronous counter, everyone is clocked together and all bits change simultaneously.